No matter how nervous or scared you are, do it. Look at somehow trying to have a voice. Look at the things that are challenges and saying, okay, I want to pick something up and solve this challenge. How do I do it? Who do I get involved? Who do I speak to that's out there that can help me drive this forward?
Hey, podcast listeners, ready to level up your career game? This podcast is brought to you by Granular Level, your ultimate TMF professionals. Need a killer CV? A magnetic LinkedIn profile? Eager to learn the ETMF or expert advice on mock interviews? Don't just dream it, achieve it with Granular Level. Let's craft your success story together. TMF Daily enthusiasts, today we're talking about the C-Disc TMF Reference Model. This topic is extremely important on multiple levels. Well, the guest I have today is going to give us great insight on how she co-founded the TMF Reference Model and why a standardized filing structure is so important. Karen Roy is a trial master file and clinical operations consultant, as well as a consultant for the C-Disc TMF Reference Model. In 2009, Karen founded the TMF Reference Model and continues to chair today. The C-Disc TMF Reference Model has been adopted globally as the standard for content, naming, and structure of the TMF. Karen recently started a new position as the board member of directors at Institute of Clinical Research and is a member of the Board of Advisors for Pharmaceutical. Karen was named the 2014 Pharma Voice 100. She's recognized as a true leader and innovator in the trial master file industry. The Business Antidote named Karen the top 5 trial master file experts to follow on LinkedIn. Besides the TMF, Karen has over 25 years of experience in clinical development, regulatory affairs, and electronic data management. Karen is a well-known speaker who has presented at conferences, led webinars, and roundtables. Karen, we're so thrilled to have you join us on the TMF Daily Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I have to say that's a great introduction, and I'm going to let my children hear it so they know what I actually do.
Well deserved. You've earned it. Karen, you're undoubtedly a true inspirational leader in the clinical research industry. Can you elaborate on how you inspire and motivate others, setting that powerful example that sparks that enthusiasm and drive?
Yeah, it is really interesting when you look at what motivates people and how you get people to follow something. And without a doubt in my head, it's being passionate and having the element of fun. And we coined the phrase TMF is too much fun. Everybody uses that now. I mean, it's not just, it's like a standard phrase. In fact, I went to a meeting the other day and people who were not involved in the TMF knew that it was too much fun. But what you do by that is you bring everybody along. And so you have to be passionate and enthusiastic. The other thing I think is to inspire and motivate others, you need to really pay a lot of attention to what people are doing, treat everybody equally, listen to everybody's thoughts, and everybody, it doesn't matter who they are or what they're doing. You need to treat them well and get them involved and make them feel like they're making a difference. Because I think if people think that what they say matters or is taken seriously, then without question, they will keep doing that and it will make them more and more passionate. I think what we found at the conferences, when you start, people come up and talk to you and you talk to them about the challenges they have, whoever they might be and however they're working, they go away going, yeah, we're part of the TMF family. And I think that's what helps spark enthusiasm and drive.
You mentioned something important, and it's you can't fake passion. You either have it or you know it. And it's like talking to people like you. You know you're passionate about the TMF. You can just see it, you can feel it, you can sense it, and the energy that you get. Like you said, validation, listening to people. It goes a long way.
Actually, you know what, Nicole? You can get passionate about anything, because if you'd told me when I was a CRA and I had my filing, I hope no one's listening, on the filing cabinet behind me, which was piling up the paper that was falling off, and you told me that one day I was going to be passionate about how to manage those bits of paper, I would have thought, no way. But actually, we were solving a problem. And that's when it becomes that you can get passionate about, when you see there's a challenge and you go, I can solve this problem. I can do something to make it better.
And that leads me into, can you share some pivotal moments from your journey in your clinical research industry that really shaped your career?
I was thinking about it. And actually, there are two pivotal moments that I want to share that are slightly negative, but they were very pivotal. And the first one was when I was working in a big CRO and the client company had a major challenge with something. I can't remember what it was, but it was an issue that we hadn't managed properly or was just there. And I had to talk to the CEO of that company. And I sat down and I worked out the answers. I literally worked out everything that had to be said, like I would have done in those days for a podcast like this. And I got on the phone and this gentleman started talking to me and I just reeled off my answers. And he actually then complained to the CEO and said, she didn't listen to me. And I sat back and I thought, he's absolutely right. So while you can have some ideas, and this is the pivotal moment for me, was don't go into a call with a preconceived outcome. Go into a call or a meeting or anything with some ideas as to how you could solve something, but not this is how we're going to do it, and listen to what the other person's saying. It honestly changed how I approach things. The other one that I thought was quite interesting was slightly more controversial in the sense that it was a TMF project and we were asked to go in by the client to go and perform a certain task. And I looked at this task and thought, this isn't going to work. And I sort of raised it gently with them and they were very adamant they wanted to do it. I didn't really push back. And we ended up sending a lot of people in to do a task. And actually, it didn't work. So not that I was saying I was right in the first place. And I learned at that point in time that if you think something shouldn't be done, don't do it. It was very easy to say, well, we're an organization. We want to earn some money. It's a nice piece of work. The clients say, do it. So we're doing it. But when you look back at it, you think to yourself, no, should have actually said no. A good example would be something like scanning an enormous backlog of paper TMFs. Is it really worth doing? There's a very good chance it's not. And it's a lot of money just down the drain because someone thinks it's a good idea. There may be a good reason to do it, but often people do it because they think, well, it's the way it could work, but actually it's a lot of money when it's better spent on other things. But then those are two pivotal learning moments, which sort of overlaps a bit with challenges that I faced. But the pivotal moment from my career, I would say, that shaped everything was when Lisa Mulcahy and I were at the EDM conference with Nancy Cellini and John Aitken, and we were on the EDM reference model, and they said, oh, look, these documents are clinical. Oh, Karen, Lisa, could you maybe come up with a list of the documents that are clinical documents? And we were like, yeah, I don't see why not. And we went away and we started writing them down. And then we went bigger than that. Okay, we got a few more people involved. And soon we had about 30 people involved. And then soon we had 50 people involved. And then we developed the TMF reference model. And that was developed with passion, drive, enthusiasm. I mean, any meeting I went into, TMF was spoken about. Even meetings that didn't even relate to TMF, someone would laugh, say TMF, and then laugh and say my name. So it was really, for me, a pivotal thing. Because if I look back at my career and say, what's the most important thing I've done in my career? It's without shadow of doubt for me, the reference model, because it's had a positive change. And the story behind the reference model and bringing everybody together and creating the community and obviously then moving it across to CDISC, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, that whole piece was definitely the pivotal moment. I suppose the other pivotal moment was when I was made redundant from the CRO I worked at and had to go and find a job and took a job in the TMF space at Flex Global. So that's probably a pivotal moment that got me into the reference model place.
It's interesting that you mentioned something that when people think the TMF, they think of you 100%. And I bet you the audience agrees. Same thing. TMF, we think of you 100%. Like too much fun. Think of TMF.
Well, some people have had mugs made with too much fun. I mean, the t-shirt, the conferences, everything we do, it's about walking away and thinking that was great. It's hard work and, getting people to go, sorting out the presentations, whatever you might be doing. It's great fun when you get everybody together.
And rewarding.
Yes, very rewarding.
makes you feel good at the end of the day that you contributed to something great.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think what was interesting for me, so the story behind like moving it across into CDISC, where we got to a point on the steering committee, there are 14 of us on the steering committee, and 2 people on the committee, Paul Fenton and Kathy Clark, went off to try and figure out how we could set up a database so that we could put all these documents into the database, etc. And we tried to figure that out. And we realized that actually we couldn't. It just wasn't an option, wasn't something that we could do. So we then said, okay, we've got 2 choices here. We either sort of stagnate in inverted commas, or we go ahead and we try and find somewhere to live. And the place that we found in the end, with lots of investigations, consolidations, talking to all the different steering committee members and the members, was CDISC. But when we told the story to CDISC, we sat there on the Zoom with the CDISC board and told them the whole story of how it started and where we got to. And it was amazing. And I actually got to the end and I actually said to them, I'm really proud of what we've done. That's amazing. It's a good story. And again, not something necessarily that my children understand. It's a little bit specific.
You reached another milestone.
Yeah.
Can you highlight some key challenges you faced in your career and how you overcame them?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've looked back over what I've done. because I've talked a lot about TMF, and obviously I had 15 years in a CRO running EDC solutions and clinical operations, and a lot of the challenges, the smaller challenges that you face in those positions are around things like recruiting people, motivating people, keeping people. And there's lots of different things that you do. But I think, again, to sort of pull it back to the reference model, and one of the biggest challenges that we ever faced was trying to get everybody to come in and buy in to the reference model. And when we very first said to somebody, okay, look, we are going to try and bring the entire industry together, and we are going to try and get everyone to use the TMF structure. A lot of people went, you're never going to do that. I mean, we're going to get them to call them the same things. We're going to get them to use the same structure. You're just not going to do it. That was probably one of the biggest challenges, was trying to persuade everybody that this was a good thing. And don't forget, that's in the time when ETMFs was still quite new. So you're persuading people they don't want to use paper. And then you're saying, right, TMF reference model. So this XX structure, whatever the sponsor name is, structure that you've been using for the last 15 years and you've grown very fond of and you think it's absolutely amazing. Well, we're throwing it out the window, and you're now going to have this new structure, which you don't know. And one of the biggest things that people made a mistake with is they tried to implement their new ETMF at the same time as their new TMF structure. So what you had is this massive resistance, people saying, oh, I don't want a new TMF. And they'd say, I don't like the TMF. And what they might be saying is, I don't like the structure, because they think the whole thing's sort of tied together. So I always said to people, try and separate them out. The biggest challenge that I faced was working as a team to try and pull together the entire industry to align to one specific thing.
Which was huge.
You've got another one coming up as well, which I'm definitely going to be mentioning, because we're doing the investigators next. So I'll get there at some stage.
Yeah, I remember when I was working in the TMF and we had our own filing structure, and my boss came to me and said, hey, we're using the TMF reference model and this is what we're doing. And we were like, okay. And then we all tried it and we were like, we hate it. And it wasn't that we hated it. It was we didn't understand it. We weren't properly trained. It was just like, here it is, figure it out, by no default by anyone. It was, you had to study it. And this is what I love about the trainings now that you guys have. You're going in depth, explaining it and making it really easy to understand.
Yeah, and actually there's a training team led by Dawn Nickham and Lisa Mulcahy on the reference model called the Fundamentals of the TMF Reference Model. And it's a full day training. And it basically looks at how to manage your TMF through the eyes of the reference model. And everybody that's been on it says it's wonderful. It'll be on the CDISC website, because I can't actually remember, but it's run generally in person in line with the conferences. So like the next big one in the States will be in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, or it's run virtually. It's great to take that and turn it into training. And do you know what's really interesting as well is, if I had £1 or $1 for every time someone said to me, what do you mean artifact?
Or why did they call it artifact?
So it was called Artifact because we went round the houses. We started off with, you can talk about a file or we talk about a document. So so if you talk about a document, it sort of sounded paper. Now, bearing in mind, when we started, it was very much paper. So you've got document sounds like a piece of paper. A file sounds like something electronic. So we went round and round and said, we don't want to call it paper. We don't want to call it electronic. We want to call it something neutral. In addition, it's not necessarily a document. Some of the artifacts are 1572, single document. Some of the artifacts, meeting material, is a group of documents. So you couldn't have document/documents, but you could have artifact. And an artifact could be, therefore, a bucket of documents or a single document. And then in all honesty, the zones was the other one, which was quite funny because we decided to split it up sort of by function, functional area, whatever. And then I remember one day we had a very long debate about zones. We ended up with the zones. And the sections, in case anybody's interested, was just because we thought the zones were too big to have a bunch of artifacts. So we need something in the middle. And I sort of made them up one day and put them in. And then obviously they got tweaked and whatever, but there wasn't a huge amount of thought put into the sections because it was literally just something to divide the zones from the artifacts. But it works really well, actually, because you've then got the setup section and then all the artifacts or the monitoring, so it actually comes together quite nicely. So some of it was almost by chance, but the zones of the artifacts were definitely there. Then, of course, there's the whole issue of sub-artifacts and whether you use sub-artifacts and how many there are. And I'll probably talk at some stage about the standardization process and what we're going to do with the sub-artifacts, which I don't know at the moment.
Do you have a favorite TMF document?
I do. I do. Actually, I wasn't going to, but I actually do. And it was me because when we very first started, we didn't have this document in the TMF. It never was in the TMF. And then we then talked about putting it in the TMF. And then I insisted, I remember clearly, on it being 111. It's the TMF plan.
That suits you.
I can't believe I've actually got a favorite TMF.
That definitely suits you. I don't know why I'm surprised, but I love it. TMF plan. I should have known that. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of taking a risk in your career and embracing that uncertainty in your journey towards success? It's a topic I'm really passionate about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think taking risks is about, for me, sometimes taking on things that's slightly bigger than you think you can manage. So it's a bit scary. So whether it's going and presenting to 250 people when you've never done it before, I am quite well known for sort of encouraging people to do that. So I'll pick on people and then maybe help them or something to try and do that. Whether it's a risk of, I remember when I was at Flex Global, we went for a project, which was really, we were a very small company at that point in time. And we went for this contract, which was very large. And so you have to sort of puff yourself out a bit and you win the contract and you're like, you can do this. And obviously you then got to deliver. Delivery never really scared me. But I think sometimes the risk is sometimes taking on things that outside the norm, maybe even doing the reference model was a bit of a risk because you're up against a lot of people who are like, why are you bothering? Why are you doing that? And now the next initiative, which I'll talk about now, but I'm sure I'll cover again, is the investigator site file. So we've solved the problem for sponsors and CROs, but investigators still have everything different, even down to different types of forms and different types of uses and obviously different systems. And I think there is a risk in terms of trying to solve that problem as well, because it's a different problem to the sponsor CRO problem. But I think it was that it's taking it on and going, I believe in it. I can do this. We can do it. And you push forward. And actually then, surprisingly enough, it happens. I have a saying that I love, which is, if you think you can't, you can't. And if you think you can, you can. And it's basically, it says if you believe in it and you think you can do it, obviously it doesn't apply to everything because I couldn't win the Olympics, but at high jump, for example, but you can. So I think it's a good sort of mantra, and that's the best way of looking at risks. If you don't believe in something and you take a risk, it's bound to fall over.
Mm-hmm. You got to be passionate about it, like you said, and you got to want it.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't, then it'll never happen.
No, I completely agree.
So what advice would you offer to aspiring TMF professionals that are looking to make an impact in the clinical research field?
Take a risk. If I look back and say, how have I made a difference? Or what are standout moments? One of them, I think, was when I was working at the CRO, and it was Chiltern. And I moved out the clinical development group or clinical operations and started up a group called EDC Solutions, basically supporting the implementation of EDC at sites, training sites, etc. And it sort of allowed us to stick our heads above the parapet and be noticed, because we ended up being a very profitable unit, a very interesting unit, focused on by a number of sponsors. We sort of looked outside the norm. But sometimes, obviously, you're sitting in a job and you're just doing the job, so you can't maybe change jobs. But you could look outside your job. So if people are asking for volunteers for the reference model, for example, and you work in TMF, volunteer. If people are looking for people to submit abstracts for conferences, submit an abstract. No matter how nervous or scared you are, do it. Look at somehow trying to have a voice. Look at the things that are challenges and saying, okay, I want to pick something up and solve this challenge. How do I do it? Who do I get involved? Who do I speak to that's out there that can help me drive this forward? The other thing I'd say is create a network. When I left Flex, and as I said, I thought I was going to retire, and everyone laughed. And I actually genuinely thought I was going to slow down. But when I left, I realized that what I'd left with, apart from 15, 16 years of great fun and some wonderful people and all the rest of it, was my network. Nicole, you're the perfect example of somebody who's created a network. I mean, I don't know, how many followers do you have now? The last time I looked, it was many thousands. That's a perfectly good example of what you've got, what you've created is that network. And you're a perfectly good example of somebody taking a risk. This podcast is a good example of you taking a risk and going, okay, I'm going to do it. And now look at you doing podcasts. Fantastic. You know, really making a name for yourself, standing out, putting your head above the parapet and being noticed. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's like you said, do it scared. Do it scared. And the other piece is, how do you find the confidence? What do you suggest? When you say, submit an abstract. Okay, I submitted it, but now I actually have to follow through. How do I get my big girl panties on and follow through on this?
It can be challenging. I'm a traditional E. I'm a far E. So in other words, I'm extroverted. For somebody who's more introverted, it can be difficult. However, I actually think one of the best things to do is try and find people that you can follow, that you can be mentored by, that you can get to know. Everybody loves helping people. It's one of those things, if you ask somebody for some help, they're generally going to help you. That's probably one of the best ways of getting some confidence. Or also speaking up if you feel you can't do it on your own. Yeah, I'd like to do it, but I'd like to do it with someone, because then I've got someone to effectively lean on as we go through. And don't be scared to make a mistake as well. As in, if you stand up and do a presentation and it doesn't go exactly to plan, or as happened to me once, my heel fell off my shoe.
Oh no!
And I tried to walk around with one shoe with a heel and one shoe without a heel, balancing my foot. And eventually I just went, oh, this isn't going to work. So I kicked my shoes off and did the whole thing barefoot, and it was fine.
Good for you. Look at that. I mean, that's inspiring in itself. Kick your heels off. Make it work.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of collaboration and communication? Because it's huge in clinical research. You have to be able to collaborate, and talk about why it's important for success in a clinical research project.
Yeah, I think whenever you run a clinical trial or do a TMF project, whether you were a sponsor and the CROs working together, you're always having to work as a team. And if you work as individuals, it's going to fall apart. And I think the sponsor CRO thing is a very good place to focus on collaboration. It's got to be honest. It's got to be straightforward. It's got to be regular. It's got to be appropriate. But actually, if you do that, you will always have problems, but it's how you solve the problems that matters. I said that to someone else the other day, actually. I was saying, it's not the fact that you have a problem. It's the fact of how you solve it. And communication is a really good example and timely communication. So I remember many moons ago, there was a project where we had an amendment in one of the countries that somehow hadn't been submitted. Now, everyone's human and it just hadn't been submitted. And we were trying to solve the problem and it turned into a very difficult situation. And actually, when I look back at it now, rather than trying to have the whole thing nicely boxed up to hand back, we should have just said, look, hands up, this is what's happened, this is our plan, and deliver on the plan. Everybody makes mistakes, as I said. And if something's gone wrong, don't not communicate it. It's important to communicate it, but with the solution at the same time. And collaboration, again, is important where everybody is equal. And this is really key to me, is whether it's the CTA working on the project or the project director, everybody's equal. Everyone's got to be treated respectfully and collaborated with properly and communicated with. And I think if everybody does that, you have a much better chance of success.
Leave the ego at the door. We're all on the same team.
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
Now, say you're working with someone who's sort of has a difficult personality, and you're trying to get those TMF docs and you're getting some resistance. What's the best advice of how to work with someone that has a difficult personality and they're just...
So I started my career in medical repping. And what was interesting with doing medical repping is that you get a lot of personality assessments. You have a lot of discussions about types of people. And the most successful people in the world, I think, are the people that can look at a type of person and work out how much of a driver, how much of an enthusiast they are on whatever scale you use and the quadrants and all the rest of it, and work out what is going to appeal to them. So some people, it will appeal with you being enthusiastic and going in and chatting. And some people, it will be much more analytical approach where you would maybe sit down and work out and show them some graphs about percentage completion. Some people you just have to keep hammering at, and some you find a different way of communicating with. But I think somehow, if you've got somebody that's difficult, you need to work out how to help them achieve what they don't need to achieve. And I think it's actually in sales, people learn how to go in and approach with different personality types. I actually think it's important in any job, because any job is a sales job. It's just what you're selling.
Those customer service skills.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about how is the process of managing the trial master file evolved over the years, and what trends are you seeing that's shaping its future?
That's a very interesting one. And I don't know how quickly your podcasts get released. I'm assuming not within the next 2 weeks, or are they released very quickly? It's a question, because we have a conference coming up where there's a theme which sort of ties back to it. Going back, paper. I've done been part of some QC projects that are literally boxes and boxes of paper. And the challenge with paper is it all sits locally. And so every country had the protocol, every country had this, every country had that. And over time, my initial job when I was in sales at Flex was to go in and educate people that actually an ETMF was better than paper. And so people were trying to be convinced about the value of having it electronically rather than having it physically. One of the first customers we ever had was because they used to fly their CRAs all into a London venue to look at the TMFs all the time. Once a month, these people will be flown in, and somebody said, wouldn't it be good if we could have everything seen online electronically? And so that's sort of where it came from. So then it became sort of a storage place. So therefore it was like everyone worked with everything. And at the end of the day, they would then go, okay, fine, we finished, let's put it into the ETMF, which was actually just almost an archive facility. And then over time, I think as you start coming towards today, you start sort of coming towards where we are today, people started actively managing, and you've got all the different companies that come up with different categorizations for active management and what type of TMF manager you are, et cetera, et cetera. And it's sort of streamlined, and it's can still be quite clunky. And one of the reasons why things are clunky, I think, is because lots of things are disconnected, whether it's a system where everything's connected in some shape or form, or whether you've physically connected something. I think at the moment it's still different pieces of information get entered in different places. And the trend that absolutely is going to shape the future is digital data flow. So digital data flow is essentially reuse of data. So where you put something in once and it gets used in other places. Now, there's an initiative which gets me very excited. So my passion comes out now, and it's a Transcelerate initiative. CDISC is working with, and ICH. So ICH has something called C#, which is their digital protocol. Transcelerate and CDISC and Vulcan Fire had their own version. It's all come together, which is fantastic. And this basically is, rather than writing a paper like a Word document as a protocol, it's data. So you have all the data put into the protocol. That data can drive EDC screens, can drive validation programs. That data can drive the completeness requirements in a TMF. And then you've also got the other piece, which is putting the data in, like the site names, the site numbers, going in one place, and then through data flow going out and populating things. That's slightly different to the digital data flow initiative, but it's all still driving towards not having to input multiple times. The other thing I think that is interesting is some of the other Transcelerate initiatives where they're looking at content reuse and they're looking at templates. So working out how you can have templates for different things. And funny enough, just before this call, I was talking to somebody who's a medical director at a commercial unit in the UK. And he was saying, a delegation log. Every company has their own delegation log. That is of no commercial benefit to a company to have one delegation log over another. There's of no commercial benefit to have a signature log over another. We should have standardized as much as possible. And I think Transcelerate's got the opportunity to try and help standardize things. It's a long way off. We have talked in the reference model. We actually had a meeting where one of the things that someone put on the table for us to do is to create examples of a specific document. So almost templates, like a templated screening log, a templated this, a templated that. We didn't, because that's such a huge job. But I think somebody like Transcelerate, with the number of people they've got involved and the money they've got involved, might be able to do it. So I think for me, that's sort of the trends that I see is much more around the digital data flow. The other thing that I see shaping the future is the investigator side. I've talked about the ISF model, but the ISF model, investigator site file model, is really important. It's about standardizing the contents of the site files and then standardizing the contents of other types of, device trials. We've got something there, but maybe being a little bit more detailed there, non-interventional, all those sorts of things, I think. And trial types are changing all the time. I think that will shape the future. I also think the reference model is here to stay. Mm-hmm. It's here to stay as a structure. Whether it's here to stay as documents or as data is to be seen.
I want to back up a little bit, back to COVID and how ETMFs really helped the business keep going. That was amazing for people who are already on board.
Yeah, but you know what COVID did? So some people got ETMFs as a result. Some people got ISFs as a result, but there were other little things that happened. So there was a company that I was working with that didn't like digital e-signatures. They just didn't like them. Everything had to be wet ink signed. Overnight, that company went from paper signatures to e-signatures. I mean, like homeworking, overnight as a company at Flex, everybody had been in the office and suddenly everybody had to go and work from home. And we didn't even almost blink. We set them up and off they went. And it's a different world. But from a point of view of TMF, that it actually changed the TMF, mostly not. I'd say that some people put in ETMFs, but it changed a lot of the things around here and the sites, and made people start thinking about, what do we do about living documents? What do we do about signature logs? How do we handle that sort of thing?
Let's go over some of the conferences that are coming up. So we got the 2024 CDISC TMF Europe Exchange, which is April 24th to the 25th in Berlin. It's
absolutely Berlin, with all the bears all around the city. I'm very excited about that. So we have the keynote for the whole conference, because it's the first time we're combining CDISC and TMF. So for the whole conference, it's Rob DiCicco, who I'm going to say is a VP a product. I don't exactly remember his exact title, but he talked in the previous US conference for us, and he's covering off all the sort of clinical content reuse, digital data flow, standards, all of that together. And then we're splitting into the TMF and CDISC. And then keynote on the TMF side is Torsten Stemmler, who is the head of GCP inspection for beef. And what an interesting chap. Really, he's looking at ICHE6R2 versus ICHE6R3. He's looking at the past, the present, the future. A really interesting guy, I like him most of all because when we went on, I said to him, what do you think of the reference model? He said, oh, I love it. I was like, okay, tick. He also thinks that the ISF model is a very, very good idea. So basically, I was very happy with him. And then we've obviously got loads and loads of other tracks and looking at standards and looking at just a whole host of different things.
It's going to be epic.
It is going to be epic.
And then you have the CDISC Japan Interchange Tokyo, and that's June 10th and 11th.
Yes, and a lady called Francisca Dama who is actually going to be presenting there. And I think there was somebody else from Inception who's presenting. So they got TMF in. I presented to the Japan. The 3 Cs are the committees. It's the Conference Coordinating Committee. So you have the E3C for Europe, and you have the T3C for TMF, and then you have the ET3C for European TMF, and then you have the J3C. So I presented to the J3C, the Japanese Conference Coordinating Committee, and they were very excited to have TMF, and they've got an entire sort of, not a track, but quite a long session focused on TMF. So it's very exciting.
That is exciting. Is there any other conferences we should have on our radar?
Well, only the one in
Scottsdale
in Phoenix, Arizona. And I think that's going to be a really big one as well. Not least of all because they're an hour from Las Vegas. It's going to be a very big CDISC and TMF conference as well. Don't have the agenda yet. The call for abstracts is out. So if anybody who listens to this wants to put in an abstract, go to the CDISC website and put it in.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Thank you.
Now, what specific benefits can professionals in the clinical research field expect to gain from attending these conferences?
You know what? Every time I go to a conference and I get asked the question, what you think was most valuable? Funny enough, for me, it's the networking.
Yes.
Because you get to learn a lot. Although when you've been doing it in TMF for a long time, you probably learn a bit less sometimes at the conferences, but you always have interesting conversations. You always find somebody who's either got some challenge or has some idea that says, you know what, I think it'd be a good idea if you do this. Actually, that's a really, really good idea. That's how the ISF model started. That's how a lot of these things started. And I think you then become part of the TMF family, which then means you've got people you can ask questions to. And so many people have said to me after conferences, wow, I didn't realize this whole community even existed. And now I've got my family around me and now I can get on with it. So I think that's, in all honesty, the biggest thing, sense of belonging and obviously learning as well.
I love it. Karen, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today on the TMF Daily Podcast. We can't wait to see what you'll accomplish next.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
What an absolute mind-blowing interview we had today on TMF Daily Podcast with Karen Roy. Her insights into the trial master file left me speechless. I know I'll be pondering them for months to come. If you're feeling the pull of intrigue after diving into this TMF dialogue with Karen, why not take the opportunity and spread the knowledge? Just like Karen preaches, she believes in gathering and sharing knowledge. Share this episode with your inner circle and let them join in on the TMF enlightenment. After all, who's to say this moment isn't a pivotal part of your TMF journey towards greater understanding? We here at TMF Daily would certainly appreciate it. You can find me on Instagram, TMF_enthusiast, or on LinkedIn by searching my name, Nicole M. Palmer. But keep in mind, my DMs get nuts. So if you want to reach out to me, make sure that I see it. Try me on Instagram. This is your host, Nicole Palmer, signing off.